Good morning, class. Hey, it's Mr. Stewart, and it's Monday morning here at the beginning of week 12, and of course we are fairly quickly approaching the end of the term. So, just as a reminder, you need to be, if you're behind on anything in the course, you need to probably at this point be trying to get caught up fairly quickly. All right. Today we're going to be talking about Chapter 12, and Chapter 12 really has to do with the idea of personnel or people as a security measure. And this is what we're really talking about, is the security officer, the security professional, as a countermeasure, as something else to deploy. You know, we can have policy, we can have procedure, we can use the best of technology, but we still have to have people in regard to maintaining good physical and information security. I mean, people have something that not anything else has. We have the ability to reason. You know, and also understand that people are probably one of the most, if not the most, expensive countermeasure available. But that expense is really worth their ability to reason. That's something that policy, procedure, and technology just don't have. Reasoning can be defined as the ability to think, infer, and comprehend in a rational manner. You know, that's the thing that computers have historically not been able to do, is to make inferences or to reason through a situation. People are unique to this because we have that ability. We can think about something, and we can think about it from multiple angles, multiple sides, and with multiple variables. And we also think about it a little bit with some emotion involved too. You know, we typically do better at things that we are emotional about. Well, technology and policy and procedure has no emotion, and so therefore it can't necessarily bring that into its ability to make a decision. You know, a computer it's kind of like if such and such is something, then it will do something else. But people are like, well, if such and such is something, but we also have these other variables in play, and that may work on our decision. It's not just black and white with people, the way it is with technology or policy and procedure. So reasoning is necessary for the security personnel to be able to observe and report. I mean, honestly, are you going to report everything you see? Is everything you see a potential security risk? Probably not. There's some things you observe that may simply be a freak of nature. It may simply be a mistake. It may simply be this, or it may simply be that. We have the ability to discern and filter the important things from the non-important things. That's another one of those things that makes us unique. Now, not everybody is good at that right from the beginning. Sometimes it takes some practice. Sometimes it takes, just some experience. But reasoning is necessary for us to be able to observe and report. And we said that security personnel are probably one of the most expensive countermeasures available because you have to have multiple ones. You can't just have one person that represents the whole security function of a major organization. You have to have multiple people. And if you're going to provide coverage, 24 hours a day coverage, you're going to have somebody there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And of course that gets expensive when you're paying that person by the hour and they're working, 5, 6, or 7 days a week, just depending upon the situation. So people are expensive, and usually we also provide benefits to the personnel, which we don't have to provide insurance for. A piece of technology, we don't have to provide insurance for our policy, but we typically do provide those benefits for the people because that's something the people need. And so that's another thing that contributes to that major expense. So with that being said, just understand it is very expensive. People are expensive, but people are also excellent resources because they have the ability to think, infer, reason, and comprehend, and make some decisions based on more than simply an if-then statement or a black and white issue. All right. Training is also a very important part of having good security personnel. Training is necessary at almost any cost. And the reason that we say that now is because historically security officers were only trained on the job, or if they were given any training, it was very, very brief, and it was very limited because, hey, they weren't being paid very well, and what we were really trying to do here is to get warm bodies to be able to think, infer, and reason and all that stuff at the cheapest possible cost. And so there really was no standards of hiring, there were no standards of training, and nationally there still is no standard for training of security officers, but at least most states have at this point moved to some sort of minimum set of standards. Alabama was a little slow to do this. We just got a security regulatory board, a couple, 3 years ago, and they just enacted security officer licensure a couple years ago, and now, as of September of 2013, every security officer in the state of Alabama that comes on post after September 1, 2013 must have a license, and that means they have met at least a certain very minimum set of standards. There's also other types of training that you can get, and I've put a link here for a website. It's called asisonline.org, and what ASIS is the American Society for Industrial Security, and it's a trade organization. But this trade organization is worldwide at this point. It is one of the largest security trade organizations out there, and they offer some certifications that really add to your professionalism. CPO, Certified Protection Officer, CPI, Certified Professional Investigator, and they have another one or two, and it's actually very rare for one person to have every cert that ASIS offers, but if they do, you can pretty well write it on the wall that they're a very professional, security-minded person, and they could provide security at almost any type of facility because they have at least those unique those unique set of skills that really will allow them to adapt to whatever the organization is. Now, on page 233 in your textbook, there are several things that training for security officers should include. I want to draw your attention to these. It's actually quite a bit. The first one mentioned, interestingly enough, is ethics. And ethics is very important because ethics is really your moral code. How you discern the difference between right and wrong while consistently doing what is right. That's what it means to maintain ethics. Now, Alabama is really strong on ethics just in the last couple of years. In fact, they have an Alabama Ethics Commission, and if you happen to work for the state government in any capacity, you have to basically swear that you're going to be an ethical state employee and not do anything wrong. And if you do, you could actually go to prison for it in this state, which is interesting because most states have not quite got to that point yet. But ethics is important because ethics will help you maintain a very professional attitude, and you will do a very professional job if you're working ethically. Some of the other things that's included is training on professionalism. How not to be slovenly, how not to act, how to wear your hair the correct way. How to be polite, which is you're thinking, well, why would we need to teach that? And that's my point exactly. Why would we need to teach it? But it's not being taught that well out here in the real world now. So if you're going to be a professional at something, you have to look and act professional as well. And I think that's very important. You also have to understand legal aspects. You need training on legal aspects because you need to know if what you're doing is possibly breaking the law or bending the law or whatnot. So you do need training on legal aspects, use of force. We do train security professionals on use of force. We don't usually ask them to use use of force simply because of the liability aspects and the legal aspects of it. You know, it's not our job. It's not our job to restrain and to arrest. On occasion, you may have to, if the situation warrants it, but it's more of your job to observe, report, document, and prevent. Use of communications, good observation skills, report writing. Report writing is very important because you would be surprised at how many people I have had working for me in the past, in both the security perspective and a law enforcement perspective, that really couldn't even put a good sentence together. And when they did put a sentence together, it sounded terrible. I mean, it's like, did you not pass high school English or what? And understand that you have to be able, if you're a security person, professional, you have to be able to communicate through the written word. And it's got to make sense. It's got to have good punctuation. And so that's why in college you have papers to write, and you have in an online class you have discussion postings. All of that is practice for good report writing. You have to be able to express yourself clearly, concisely, and grammatically correct. It's important that you are grammatically correct. Now, I know I speak, my version of Southernese, and I may say ain't, and I may say y'all, but hey, when I write it, I don't write that. When I write something, I use proper English. And you'd be surprised at how many people write the way they talk, and it makes them look dumb as a rock. I'm serious. It makes them look just ignorant if you write that the way that people talk sometimes. So, you have to have those good report writing skills. You also will receive training on basic security measures, physical security, information security, personnel security, policy and procedures. You get training on life safety, such things as first aid, CPR, what to do for different types of injuries and things like that. Because, as a security personnel, sometimes people are going to get hurt. Maybe it's the other people in the facility through some accident. You're going to be the first responders to the scene, so you need to be able to know how to do that stuff. You may be trained, you probably will at this point be trained on workplace violence, because that's something that is now an issue. We didn't really have to worry about that 20 years ago, but we do now. Conflict resolution, that's very important too. Because, hey, people get emotional, and people get upset about certain things, and they get into an argument, and you have to be able to de-escalate that before it goes to any further, before it gets physical, so to speak. Need to be trained on security awareness, information protection, fire protection. Most people don't overlook that one. And really what we're talking about here is, okay, you may need to inspect fire extinguishers, you may need to inspect sprinkler systems, alarm systems to make sure that they're all working properly, and if they're not, you know who to call to fix them. And you may also be trained on very minimal firefighting skills, because, hey, if you can stop a fire when it's small, then you will mitigate much of the damage then if that thing spreads and maybe even gets out of control. You may be trained on traffic and crowd control. If you work security in a location where that is important, you should receive training on it. Such as if you work security at the Von Braun Civic Center, when they have concerts. What happens during concerts or sporting events? Sometimes people get emotional, people get upset, people get excited, and the crowd mentality kicks in, and you have to be trained in order to how to deal with that to a certain degree, or else you're going to get hurt if you're not properly trained on that. You're trained on emergency management. Sometimes you will not be able to prevent everything, and there will be emergency situations, and you must be able to handle those. For example, you cannot prevent a tornado. You can harden your targets. You can have policy and procedures and drills in place and things like that, but if a tornado hits, there is going to be loss of life and property. And you have to be able to manage that emergency and get everything back the way it should be as quickly as possible. Bomb threats or hazardous material responses, that's something that is becoming increasingly important as far as training goes, because you're the first responder. and public relations. You can't just simply be the security officer that hides in the shadows anymore. You may be out in the public eye, and if you are out in the public eye, you need to act professional, be professional, and you may be the one that if some incident happened at your facility that may have to go and do a press conference with somebody. So you have to be trained on public relations as well. So those are just some of the examples of some of the things that security officers should be trained on. And honestly, to get a security officer license in Alabama, you at least have to be exposed to pretty much every one of those topics. Now, I don't say completely trained, but you're exposed to, because to get a license in Alabama, you have to have 8 hours of training, and so it's kind of hard to condense all of those things I just talked about down into just 8 hours. So you're exposed to it, and then you're requested to probably be trained further by your employer. So at a minimum, you need exposure to all of these things so that you can understand their importance, and that can kind of guide your behavior just a little bit. Okay, let's talk for a minute about police officers versus security officers. Understand that historically, off-duty police officers were hired as security officers. And this was done for a couple of reasons, and mainly it was done because, hey, they were already allowed to carry a weapon, they had handcuffs, they were trained. In fact, they were well trained compared to other security officers, and most of the time it was also doing those police officers a favor because their salaries were usually fairly low as well, and they needed to moonlight in order to make extra money. And I guess it worked okay. But after 9/11, we saw a definite movement toward professional security officers. Now, there's some pros and cons, I guess, to using police officers for private security. But this is something we typically advise not to do in the security industry now. Hire your own security professionals. Don't hire the off-duty police officers, because guess what? That police officer is first and foremost a police officer. If they see a law violation, they are going to have to act on a law violation regardless of what the security employer wants you to do. So, I mean, if you're an off-duty police officer and you're in uniform and you are working security at Walmart and you see somebody do something that is a law violation that maybe the employer says, you know, just stop them and do whatever, but you know, we don't typically prosecute for that. But now you're a police officer and you see it, you have a duty to act. You have a duty to prosecute. And you also have a duty to use physical force to make the arrest if the person resists, which is something we typically don't tell private security to do. So it does kind of open that employer up for liability as well. Plus, if that police officer has to act as a police officer, they may not be going by their employer's own security policy, and then they may be taken away from the security detail if they actually have to arrest somebody and take them downtown to jail. So then they're left without security. So, I mean, that's just a possible scenario, and it's one of the reasons why we typically say don't use police officers anymore. If you read 235 to 239 in your textbook, it really gives you a good discussion on this whole idea of police officers versus security officers, and you'll probably see some of those questions on the test. So make sure you read those things. All right, contract security versus proprietary security. Proprietary security forces are owned, operated, employed, and controlled by the organization they protect, whereas contract security forces are their own security company and they're hired under a contract by the organization. And you're probably trying to think, well, what's really the difference? The difference is contract security companies, they have contracts. For example, I have a friend of mine that owns a security company here, or doesn't own the security company. He's the regional manager of a security company here in Huntsville. And his company did have the Huntsville hospital system. and that was his biggest contract. Now he also provides security officers to other locations, but he had one huge contract to provide security for the Huntsville hospital system. Now, the Huntsville hospital system also has their own proprietary security company, and really what the way that their system worked was Huntsville Hospital would use this security company as kind of the temporary agency to see if they really wanted to hire whoever the person that was employed under the contract company to be a full-time Huntsville Hospital System employee. Kind of give them a chance to give them a trial run, and if they didn't want to hire them, then the security company also would typically get rid of them or move them to some other location where they had another contract for. But in many cases, they would pick those employees up, and they would then get better pay, better benefits. They just had to kind of work a time for the contract company. And due to the Unaffordable Care Act, this particular company actually lost the contract because they needed to spend less money on security and more money on some other things that the Unaffordable Care Act mandated. So the hospital system went with a cheaper company, and by all accounts, is probably the cheapest bid that they got. And they're paying the price now because they haven't been able to find anybody that really passes their training program, or very few people that can actually pass their training program. They're not happy with the service that this contract company is providing, and they very well may just simply go straight to a proprietary type of security system, because I think they've probably got a bad taste in their mouth with some of the contract companies. Now, and understand that in the state of Alabama, a contract security company could be me that goes out and gets a business license to say I'm now a security company. I don't have to have any experience. I don't have to have any knowledge of security to open and run a security company in Alabama prior to some of the licensure requirements that just went into place. So you've got some companies out there which are really small, mom and pop organizations that really specialize in providing a warm, untrained body in a uniform to some place that just wants to say we have a security officer. Now, that's not to say that we don't have some very professional security agencies here in town. Yes, we do. Security Engineers Incorporated, very professional. Allied Barton Security, very professional. Wackenhut Security, very professional. There are loads of security companies in Huntsville, but most of them are smaller companies, and typically the smaller you get, the less training that they have, and they really specialize again in providing warm, untrained bodies in a uniform for somebody that just wants to say, yes, we have security. If you want a really good security professional, you need to go with some company that offers at least a certain amount of training to their people. Like Wackenhut. It's not called Wackenhut anymore. I think they have a new name, G3 or something like that. But Wackenhut typically even had they have a multi-week security academy they put their people through, and they must pass tests in order to continue employment. They historically have hired ex-military, ex-law enforcement, things like that had some basis of knowledge already in regard to security. So look at the table 12.1 on page 240 in your textbook, and that really gives you a comparison of some of the security program characteristics, and it tells you how good or how poor that proprietary companies are in regard to those, contract companies or a combination of those, and even off-duty law enforcement. And if you look at off-duty law enforcement, you don't have a good on anything. It's very poor, fair, or poor on almost every characteristic. So if that was the case, why would you really even hire off-duty police officers to do security? Because statistically, they are some of the worst security officers out there. They may be excellent police officers, but again, the mission is different between police and security. So you're asking them to do a job they're really not trained on unless they have prior experience. So it's kind of a toss-up, I guess, between the proprietary and the contract, and the combination of those, just kind of whatever fits the model of your agency or your needs as well. So, make sure you look at that table on page 240 in your textbook, because it'll give you a good comparison of all those security characteristics. And lastly, the last thing I want to talk about today is increasing professionalism. After 9/11/01, the whole idea of security was rethought, and it has moved in a much more professional into a much more professional stance since 9/11. We've really seen the need for police officers to do whatever it is that they do and do it well without having to also worry about security. And there's certain other private locations and private facilities that we need to secure, so therefore we need highly professional security staff and good policy procedure and use of technology in order to provide that trained and professional security person. Training, licensure, and better pay are always that professionalism can be increased. I mean, it's like this. You get what you pay for. If you're going to pay $6 an hour to do security, you're going to get work out of that that's worth $6 an hour. If you're going to pay $15 or $20 an hour for security, you're going to get a much better work product out of that person. You're probably going to attract a different type of person into it. Because, I mean, honestly, unless I did not have a job and I was hungry, I probably wouldn't take a $6 an hour job, because that's so far less than number one, what I'm worth, and number two, what my set of skills should command out there in the open market. I'm not saying I wouldn't take a $6 an hour job, but there would have to be some things happen before I would. And you see many people out there like that have a unique set of skills, kind of like the guy on the movie Taken. They have a unique set of skills, but they're not gonna give it away. They're not gonna give their labor away unless they just have to. So if you pay them better, if you give them better training, and they have to meet at least state minimum standards to achieve a license class or a license status, then you're going to have a much more professional organization and much more professional personnel who work in the field. All right, guys, that's it for today. And make sure you read this chapter and reach out if you have any questions, problems, concerns, or issues. And I will see you in the lecture next week, and I'll see you in discussions. Have a good week, guys.